All right, welcome back. Again, I'm Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark, talking quarterbacks today. We're going to continue to break down the position groups for South Carolina this offseason. We do these, not on video, but we do positional breakdowns every year. This year we're adding video and, a little bit different because we didn't actually get to go through spring practice as far as being able to see how things played out. But South Carolina did get 5 spring practices in before things got shut down. I think with the quarterback position, this was one coming into the spring, Chris, where there was a lot of questions for me, but more so not because of the talent of the group. I think there's really good talent in this group. More so just everything around them. You look a new coordinator again. You have a guy who was a true freshman last year, was thrown into the fire, and Ryan Helinski. Colin Hill comes in as a transfer. Luke Doty gets added to the bunch as a freshman early enrollee. And, hey, you got a new position coach too. So new position coach, new play caller, new additions to the room. I like the talent of the group, but just coming into the spring, it was one where I think we were all excited to see maybe start to get some answers to some questions. We maybe got some answers, but it's really hard just in 5 practices to know exactly what to expect, I think, from this group.
It is. There are certainly more questions than answers. I think, there's maybe a few known commodities, but even within those, there are a few questions. I mean, you probably feel, maybe a little bit better about the quarterback room as opposed to last year when, Jake Bentley goes down, Ryan Helinski's in there, and although he played well at the beginning of the season and showed some, what he could do, so showed some of his talent. He was still a true freshman, and he went through those growing pains, and South Carolina had injuries, and just things sort of snowballed. But I think you look at up front the offensive line with some of the depth that's been built there, some of the talent that's there, and, maybe you feel like that can be sort of a rock or a bit of stability for South Carolina there. But lots of questions, Wes. Number one, the scheme. And obviously they got, a third of the way through spring practice, and they had to stop install in terms of live in-person on the field install, which is, the best way to do it. But Mike Bobo's scheme being implemented. So that's question number one. Just the coaching staff had to find out what can our players do. And that's still going to be a question that they're going to have to answer, and however much time they have, before the season begins, however many weeks they have to prepare, whether it's in the meeting rooms on the field. But, Nick Muse, who's your top tight end, didn't go through spring. He'll be back, but you got maybe a couple freshmen that might factor in there. You got several receivers that need to step up. You got your senior receiver, Shi Smith, who you need to have his best year. You got an open running back competition that includes a really talented freshman. You still got, quarterback Helinski had a really good spring through those 5 practices, but is he definitely 100% the guy? So there's just so many moving parts offensively that has, more questions than answers. But I think, Wes, where this team has to get, and this is the biggest question, is can they be, average to above average? Because at times last year, because of injuries and because of just an inability to move the football, whatever you want to put it on, it was a variety of factors. They were ineffective offensively, and that really hurt their chances, especially later in the year.
Yeah, I thought other than the circumstances that they have had to deal with, which is the obvious, only having 5 practices. Other than that, I thought there were some really positive things from the quarterbacks so far. Mike Bobo started his tenure by sitting Helinski down and telling him all the things he needed to improve on. Well, you listen to Mike Bobo, his first sort of meeting with the media of the spring actually ended up being right after the 5th practice when nobody knew at the time everything was going to be shut down. He seemed genuinely excited about the progress that Helinski had made. I, for one, wondered how Helinski would do being under center more than he was, in high school. We found out actually I believe he said as a sophomore, maybe a sophomore or junior, Helinski actually did spend some time under center in high school. So he did have the muscle memory the experience of actually having to go under center and drop back, turn your back to the defense, doing play action, all the different footwork things that go with that. We heard a lot of positive things about Luke Doty. We'll talk a bit more about him in a second, but I thought it was positive just in the sense of getting some things accomplished in the first 5 practices. And, I thought something that stood out for me from Mike Bobo was he said we, and when he said this, I think he meant the offensive coaches, the receivers, the offensive linemen. He said we have to do a better job around Ryan Helinski. We have to do a better job around the quarterback. And I don't think that was necessarily a direct shot at his, good friend and now former coworker Brian McClendon. I didn't take it that way, but I did take it as sort of an open and honest assessment that as they sort of scheme up what they want to do, that they need to do a better job of putting these guys in a position to succeed on a consistent basis. And like I said, I don't think that was a shot, but I do think that was a realistic assessment of where things are. Putting in an entire offense in one offseason is difficult enough as it is. With a shortened spring, and we don't even know what the preseason is going to look like either, I think Chris is going to be on the coaching staff to carry over a lot of the stuff that they did last year as far as concepts and terminology, and it's going to be on them to basically oversimplify. Generally, coaches, you rarely see coaches do too little. A lot of times coaches, especially at this level, end up getting called into doing too much. I think for South Carolina, for the quarterback position, the key is, like you said, find what they do well. It may not be as exciting. It may at times look like they're vanilla, but I think finding a way to execute a small portion of the playbook is a much better scenario. Pairing it with what I think could be a pretty good defense is going to be a much better scenario for South Carolina to find some consistency this year than to try to throw it and install everything and just sort of hope for the best.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you're not in year one of a scheme change, and I think they've talked about this a little bit as, they've looked at, what can you carry over? What was positive about last season that they could carry over? And then what do you need to change? And then, obviously with a new offensive coordinator, some new offensive coaches, some position shifts, you're going to do some things differently and look around and see, hey, what can we change up here that's going to be positive? So that's already the case in year one. But now when you got these circumstances, it's even more, it's just amplified really from that standpoint. So they're really going to have to hunker down and figure those things out because they didn't have the benefit of the spring and being around the players that much in person. Now the virtual stuff, I suppose, is good. And they obviously have a lot of tape that they can go back through and comb over and over again. And they did have the 5 spring practices and meetings and things like that, which is certainly, I think, going to be a positive for them that they did end up starting early and they got a few of them in, because it looks like other than that, they're going to be on a level playing field pretty much with everybody else, it appears. We'll have to see what the model looks like. But, yeah, I mean, Mike Bobo, he did talk positively about Ryan Helinski, Xavier Legette. He said Shi Smith can do some things. They've been impressed with Marshawn Lloyd. As a freshman, he showed some things in the spring. So, really, I think a huge thing, Wes, is, and I'm not sure other than what you're doing in the weight room and how you're training your players, some of it in football is guys get injured, but it's a real storyline. I mean, if we're going to talk about scheme, and we should, if we're going to talk about how much talent is on the team, and we should, you really have to factor in how decimated this team's been. A couple of years ago, it was on defense. Last year, it was at a point where you look at South Carolina's team and offensively, they just didn't have a lot of guys. They had both running backs down at one point. Dowdle was hurt at one point. Feaster's banged up at one point. The wide receiver room had been decimated with injuries. They played a freshman quarterback, and everything just snowballed on them. So I think a good baseline, as much as you can, is stay healthy, and maybe that helps you a little bit. But I really think they're going to have to, other than that, find some playmakers, schematically do what you can. And this doesn't have to be, nor will it be, any type of juggernaut offense, but they just have to be able to be more consistent. We talked about this several weeks ago, just in terms of, I think it was on our podcast, about categories that South Carolina has to be better in. They were one of the worst in the country in the red zone and converting third downs. Those are 2 areas they're going to have to take a hard look at, and they can get better at both of those, and you got a much better chance of winning ball games.
Yeah, and I think with Helinski, the positives there from this spring, one of them being that uh, when Bobo talked about his accuracy, he sounded very encouraged about that. And I think they've done some things working with his footwork, both from a technical standpoint and from an athleticism and speed standpoint, trying to focus on speed work this offseason. Lots of positives there. I think Helinski just has to continue to take that through the offseason, doing what he can right now on his own and trying to just do everything you can to stay mentally sharp. Luke Doty, I think if you start to look ahead to the future of the position, everybody over in that building is excited about Luke Doty and excited about the mindset that he brings, the athleticism, the leadership. I think he's still improving as a passer, but had some really good moments as a passer as well. I think he had a perfect day. I don't remember, maybe it was day 4 or something of practice. Had a perfect day throwing the football. Everybody over there extremely excited about him. You still have Jay Urich, who I think is focused more on quarterback after playing, quarterback, receiver the year before, has played special teams as well, of course. But he's sort of, to me, the veteran guy in the room that has waited his turn and provides some maturity and leadership to that building as well. So you have those guys. Then you have what I would say is the X factor is Colin Hill, who didn't get to go through spring anyway because of injury. He's still rehabbing his knee that he injured at Colorado State. I think for me, Chris, it's one of those things where we mentioned all these questions that we're going to rightfully have going into this offseason. But also when I look at all those things added together, I think the quarterback play has a chance to be really good just when you look at the ability of all these guys combined. I think it's kind of one of those things where the cream will rise to the top. Luke Doty's going to be a great quarterback, I think. Ideally, he doesn't have to step right in as a true freshman. Colin Hill has a great knowledge of this offense already. He knows what Mike Bobo wants. He's a big kid. He can deliver the football. But ideally, I think for South Carolina, he pushes Ryan Helinski to take that next step as a quarterback. So I think it's kind of one of those things where you don't necessarily know how it's going to play out. Does Luke Doty get on the field sort of as a change of pace role possibly? I think all those things are options. But without sort of knowing exactly what it looks like, I think the overall talent of this room and the ability and the drive from these guys gives me some confidence that the quarterback position will be well taken care of. And then in a second, we'll sort of look ahead to the future. But I do think the future of the quarterback position is in good hands. And I think the 2020 version of the quarterback room is in good hands.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, if you can look, sometimes we've looked at the quarterback room and said, hey, there's a bunch of 4-star guys on this roster. It looks good. And then, maybe something happens. For example, you look at last season, you've got a situation where Jake Bentley's on the roster, DeCarrion Joyner's on the roster, Ryan Helinski's on the roster. You look at that and go, they're in good shape. But then, you get to the Georgia game, Jake Bentley's hurt. He's out. Ryan Helinski had been playing well. He gets hurt in the game. Can't come back. DeCarrion Joyner's out there on one wheel as a third-string quarterback. They still win the game somehow. But that's a situation where – and then, you look at it later. Now Jake Bentley has transferred for his final year, and now DeCarrion Joyner is more focused on receivers. So I say that to make the point that I think if you have a quarterback room like that that's given a chance to develop, everybody's around, everybody's given a chance to develop, and you don't have a situation where you're throwing a true freshman in maybe before he's ready or maybe before the circumstances are sort of ideal for him to step in. That could sort of hinder things. Now you look at it and you feel like it's more stable, right? You've got Colin Hill, who's a veteran guy, like you mentioned, Wes, who already knows this system. And you've got some young talent in Luke Doty, who's on the roster. You've got Helinski, who's got some experience under his belt. He seemed to take well to the scheme and taken well to Bobo's coaching. And Jay Urich, like you said, who can, be that sort of X factor guy, like you said, and be that sort of veteran voice. And he could really do a variety of things. I mean, Jay Urich's played special teams at times when he was still in the quarterback room. So I do think you feel pretty good about where that talent is if that room can stay healthy. They have some experience, they have some voices, and I think some leadership qualities there, both for this season and then into the future, because all these guys have a chance to, stick around the program and be there for a while. I think The key is just what Mike Bobo said, playing well around him, staying healthy, schematically giving them the best chance to be successful, but then having some of these receivers step up, having a quality run game, that's going to help the quarterback position tremendously. And when they haven't had those things, we've seen the play fall off, at that position. And that's not just at South Carolina, that'd be anywhere.
Ryan Helinski came in with such high expectations. California kid. Everybody knows his story, and his story, everything his family went through. Expectations were through the roof. And then on top of it, he was thrown directly into the fire. Goes out there against Charleston Southern, just lights them up. Plays well in a loss to Alabama. And the expectations, I think, at that point, grew even more. And then we sort of forget that he is a true freshman. He's going through a lot of these things last year for the first time. Injuries piled up both to him and around him. And then the offense sort of, as the year went on, sort of fell off at the end, especially when the running game wasn't able to get going as well. So easy to forget Ryan Helinski is only a true sophomore. Luke Doty, a true freshman this year. Then I think you start to look at Colton Gauthier, a kid who is also a 4-star guy on the Rivals rankings. A big kid, can deliver the football, sort of fits that mold, I think, fits the mold. He's going to be a quarterback room fit from a personality standpoint. I think with Helinski and Doty, he's a worker. I think one thing you've seen from Colton Gauthier the last few weeks is he's stepped up his game recruiting other guys as well. That's something he always has been involved with, trying to recruit other guys to join him at South Carolina. But I think if you look at least online and his sort of online recruiting of guys, he's stepped up in that way as well. So I think this is a position where if you look back on Muschamp's time at Florida, the quarterback position was a big question mark. They had elite defenses, and, not finding that perfect fit at quarterback, let's be honest, it held them back. But I think when you look at the way that they've recruited at quarterback here at South Carolina, you have to be impressed. And I think you feel good, even looking ahead, some of the guys that they're in on for, like a Gunnar Stockton for the class of 2022. You just feel good about the level of talent that they keep adding to this room.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I think I saw somebody say the other day on social media, and I can't properly credit that, quarterbacks are made to transfer. And so if you're recruiting a really good one every year, that's okay. That's a good problem to have. That's what you want to do. And you're going to have a guy switch a position or transfer. And so I don't think people need to worry about that. We honestly get that question a lot. I mean, Wes, how many times did we get asked last year, do you think Joyner will transfer? He hadn't seen the field. Do you think he'll switch positions? And so you got to give it time, see it play out. And now Joyner's switch position, I think, has got a really good chance to help at receiver, by the way. Get into that, obviously, at another time. But, yeah, I mean, you got to continue to stack talent. You got to get guys who have, the right mentality. You got to, from a recruiting standpoint, invest your time and your energy in guys that are talented, but guys that you can sign, also. And you got to know where you're at in a given year. They just landed 2 very talented quarterbacks, and then they were able to get another 4-star guy out of Georgia that other schools wanted. And that's really a positive when you look at it. And Mike Bobo can point to his track record with, coaching some guys and recruiting some guys and producing some NFL draft picks. Matthew Stafford, number 1 NFL draft pick. So, they created some dynamic offenses at Georgia. And a lot of people looked at Bobo's offense and said, Georgia's offense, I don't know about that, but they were really good at times, Wes. So they also had a lot of talent. And if they can somewhat recreate that at South Carolina, I don't know if it'll happen. That'd be a positive, but it starts at quarterback. And so Mike Bobo's had a good track record at that as far as coaching guys and recruiting guys as well. And right now, when you look at it on paper, they've got some guys that can play. And I think they've got some guys that can play more than it's shown at times at other positions. Again, staying healthy is a key there as well. But, I think they've got a good blend of guys at quarterback. And I think it's going to be really intriguing to see what happens not only this season, but into the future.
Yeah, it always starts at quarterback, especially, I think, in today's game. But then I think if you look at what happened at Georgia, you look at these offenses, you have to have a dynamic running back as well, and you have to have an offensive line that can open up holes. So that's going to do it for our quarterback discussion. But next time, we're going to break down the running backs. Does Marshawn Lloyd take the first snaps at that position for South Carolina? Is there somebody else that could keep the freshman from doing that? And just what is realistic for a guy that was extremely highly recruited but is still, a true freshman stepping into major college football for the first time. So we'll talk about that next time. For Chris Clark, I'm Wes Mitchell. This has been another production of GamecockCentral.com. We'll see you next time.